So when SPSS launches, you'll see this dialog box, and I usually just hit cancel on that to close it out. So SPSS is set up pretty similar to a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, as you can see. You'll notice on the lower left-hand part of the screen, this tab is highlighted that says Data View. So this is where you would enter your raw data. So it's similar to Microsoft Excel in that we have rows and columns. In this case, each column is going to be a variable. You can see it has the abbreviation up there. And each row would be a participant, a subject, a case number, whoever's participating in your study. If you go down here to variable view, it changes the screen slightly, and this is where we can actually name and define our variables in SPSS. So I'm just going to make up some data to give you an idea of the different types of variables that you can enter. So we'll say that the first one was test scores. One thing to point out is that when you enter the variable name, you can't have any spaces or characters. So you can see I have it all one word test score. So when I hit enter, you can see SPSS is going to fill in some defaults. It's going to automatically default to a numeric variable, which is exactly what we want in this case. The width is how wide the columns are, which 8 is the default, which is usually fine. And it's going to give 2 decimal places, which is okay. Here where it says label, you can actually double click and you can give it a more descriptive name. So we could call this score from first exam, in case you were tracking several over the course of a semester. The values we don't need to use right now, along with the rest of these. The really important one is this column measure. So we want to tell SPSS what type of variable it is. And you can see if you click on it, you have a drop-down menu with either scale, ordinal, or nominal. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and put scale. So next we could enter a nominal variable. For example, we could do gender. And in this case, we'll leave it as a numeric variable because that's what SPSS likes to read when it's analyzing it. But we'll have to give it value labels in this case. So if you click on the column labeled values, see this blue box with the 3 dots. If you click on that, it'll bring up a dialog box where you can put in labels for your nominal variables. So in this case, I'm going to use the value 0 to indicate male in our study. I'll add that. And then 1 will be female in this case. And we'll go ahead and hit OK. Same thing, you could give it a more descriptive label. In this case, gender is pretty straightforward, but if you wanted to label it further, you can do that. And then again on measure, we'll go ahead and label that as a nominal variable since it's only ones and zeros. So now we have 2 variables, so if we go back to data view, you can see SPSS has filled those in the columns. So now this is where we could go ahead and enter our raw data. So let's just enter some made up data here for our class. We'll just say that these are test scores. So we'll just say that we have 10 people and we'll go ahead and say half male, half female. So you can see here on the gender column, it went ahead and plugged in those gender labels that we gave SPSS. You can go back and forth whether they're numeric values or the actual value labels. If you go under this menu view, and you can see here the default is checked as show value labels. If you uncheck that, it'll turn it back into ones and zeros. So I like to leave that on to remind me how I coded the data. In this case, male is 0 and female is 1. So we'll go ahead and leave that view value labels turned on for now. So now that we have some data in SPSS, we can run a couple of really simple analyses. The main menu that we'll use when we're analyzing is right up here, the Analyze menu. And the first menu that we'll look at is this descriptive statistics one. So there are a couple ways that we can run our basic descriptive statistics. The first is using this very first menu called frequencies. So if we click on that, we get a dialog box that shows all of the variables in our data set. In this case, there's only 2. And the variables that it'll run frequencies on, we want to transport those over to this dialog box on the right. So I'm just going to head and click the arrow and move those over. You can see there's a check mark right here that says display frequency tables. So those will make some nice tables to display our data. And if we click on the statistics tab, we can get some more statistics. So here we have a couple of options. I'm just going to go ahead and click mean, median, and mode, and we'll also ask for the standard deviation. There's a couple other options, but we'll just start out with those basics. So I'll go ahead and hit continue. The other thing I wanted to point out is this button charts right below the statistics button. If you click on that, we can actually ask for histograms. There it goes. So if we click on histogram, we can even click to show a normal curve on the histogram, so it'll give us a visual representation of our data. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue and then OK. So you'll notice what happens is we had this other window pop up, and you can see here on the upper left that it's labeled output. So when SPSS runs statistics, you'll actually have two files. You'll have the data file, which is like that Excel spreadsheet where we entered the raw data, and then we also have an output file, which is the results of all the tests that you run. So on the left-hand side here, there's kind of an outline or a summary of what we ran, and then the main output will be in this larger window. And we can kind of minimize that one a little bit so it doesn't take up so much room. So at the very top, you see some all capital computer codes commands. So this is the computer, kind of the background language of SPSS. So you can ignore this for the most part, but if you ever have problems with running something, generally if you send these commands to me, I can take a look at it and usually figure out what went wrong. So here we have frequencies from our variables. You can see it's organized in a nice table. We have the score for the first exam and gender, and you can see it calculated a mean, median, and mode for all of those. And we also have a standard deviation. So you can see here the average score for the first exam was 80.9. The median score was an 82.5, and the mode was 90%. For gender, you'll notice it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to calculate the mean and median since it's a categorical variable. We use that nominal coding for it. So these numbers aren't really terribly meaningful for us. However, if we scroll down, we can now see a frequency table for both exam score and for gender. So you can see here we have about one person for each value except 90. That was our mode. 2 people received 90s. Also known as 20% of our sample. And then here for gender, you can see how many men, how many women, and the percent for our sample. And then finally, if you scroll down, you can see our histograms with nice normal curves drawn in. So again, that was all under the Analyze menu, Descriptive Statistics, and Frequencies. So you can get a lot of that same information by dropping down and using this next command, Descriptive Statistics Descriptives. So we'll just take a quick look here at how that differs from the Frequencies command. So here we can do the exact same thing. We have a dialog box that we can transport our variables. And then under Options, you can see that there's some defaults. Once my computer comes back to life here. So you can see the defaults here is to get the mean, standard deviation, minimum, maximum, and it's going to list the variables out. So we don't have access to the median or mode. You would have to do that using the Frequencies menu. So we'll go ahead and hit Continue and OK. And you can see here we have a lot of that same information. We have the total number of participants, we have the minimum score, maximum score, the mean and standard deviation. So you can see the Frequencies menu was a lot more comprehensive because we could also get the median and mode and some other statistics. But if you're just interested in kind of these basic descriptives, it summarizes it in a nice little table for you there. So those two menus are really useful ones, especially for things like data screening. For example, if we're looking at the minimum and maximum, if we had like a data entry error, say this was 980 instead of 98, and we knew that wasn't a possible score, it'd be a really nice screening procedure to make sure that our data are entered correctly. So if you want to get our output out of SPSS, there's a couple of options. One is that they copy and paste actually pretty easily into a Word document. So you can see if I hover over the output box, they're kind of in chunks or sections here. And if you click on it, you can go ahead and do either a Command or Control C, a copy paste shortcut, or you can go to the Edit menu and select Copy. So now if you pull up a Word document, for example, you can do a paste, and your output box will actually paste in as a Word table, which is kind of nice. You could edit it, you could highlight things, you could bold something. If you're trying to draw attention to something, you can resize the table, which is really nice. So it pastes pretty easily into into Word. Another option is to export your data. So under File, there's a menu called Export. And basically this will take our entire output document and it'll translate it into a Word document. So here the default is to export all of the objects in the output file. The default document is a Word document, and all we have to do now is tell SPSS where we want to save it to. So I'll just go ahead and save it on my desktop. So once you give it a name and say where you'd like to save it, you just hit OK. And it's going to export it into a Microsoft Word document for you. So that's the output file. However, we still have our SPSS data file. So we can toggle back to that screen. So this file, we could save it, and if you notice, if we do a file save, that the default is to save it as an SPSS file, this .sav. So you can do that and it'll work 100% fine, except you'll only be able to open it while you're in SPSS. The other option is you can change the file type into an Excel file, so a .xls, or you can do a .csv file. So that will translate it into an Excel file that you can open even when you don't have SPSS open. It is important to point out that the output file and the data file are two separate files. So for example, the output file, if you were to save this in SPSS, you see here the default is to save it as a .spv file. So again, that's something that can only be opened using SPSS. So the easiest way to save it as a Word document is to do the export feature that I just showed you. So when you're preparing to exit SPSS, you want to make sure that you save either as a Word document, or you copy and paste the selected output that you want to keep, or you save both the data file and the output file. So that's a little bit of an overview of SPSS in terms of how to enter data, how to run basic descriptive statistics and make histograms, and also how to save or export your data. So again, we had the output window, we had the data view, which was where our actual data are stored, and then under variable view was where we told SPSS what kind of variables we were working with using this measure column. We could give them more detailed labels, and then we could actually give them numeric values or labels, especially if they're nominal variables. So SPSS will really make our lives easy this semester, just because it'll allow us to run a lot of statistical tests very quickly without doing hand calculations. And as you can see in the data view, there's really basically no limit to how many participants you can have or how many variables you can have. So it can work with some really large data sets, and you can analyze lots of different research questions using it. So I encourage you to play around with it a little bit to again get familiar with how to enter your data, and also using that Analyze Descriptives, either frequencies or descriptives menu to get started. So hope you enjoyed this. Have fun experimenting with SPSS, and we'll continue on with the next video when we look at how to run some more specific statistical tests.